Regret is a funny thing. Fleet Marshal Dorian, grim, Voss stared at the collapsing remains of Earth's orbital defense grid from the bridge of the Iron Requiem. His jaw clenched as the last of Earth's cities were consumed by fire from above. The Archivarn had won, or so they thought. But even as Earth fell, Voss's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. They'll learn. They always do. In that moment, a final encrypted signal pulsed from Earth's core, rippling across the void, a transmission that didn't plead for mercy. It was a whisper of vengeance. A promise echoing into the cosmos. You'll regret this war. And deep within the shattered remnants of Earth's network, something ancient stirred. Project Obsidian had awakened. Fleet Marshal Dorian, grim, Voss watched the burning horizon of Earth from the command deck of the Iron Requiem. The sky, once a vibrant blue, was now a swirling inferno of smoke and shattered metal. Charred debris from what was left of Earth's orbital defenses rained down like dying stars. Cities that once stood proud had been reduced to molten skeletons, and billions of lives had been snuffed out in less than a day. Yet Voss didn't flinch. His eyes, steely and unyielding, reflected nothing but resolve. Sir, Orbital Station Epsilon is gone. Lieutenant Wren's voice crackled through the comms, strained and hollow. We're down to 20% fleet capacity. Voss didn't respond immediately. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white as they gripped the tactical interface. How long? His voice was calm, but beneath the surface, a storm brewed. Wren's hesitation was all the answer he needed. 5 minutes, she finally whispered. 5 minutes. That was all the time Earth had left. Voss exhaled slowly. 5 minutes is enough. Patch me through to Dr. Keed, he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sir? Now run. A moment's pause, then Dr. Alina Keed's voice echoed across the bridge. Voss. Her voice was strained, laced with exhaustion and dread. Is it ready? Silence. Alina. It's ready. Voss's eyes closed for half a second. Project Obsidian. Humanity's final, desperate gambit. A weapon that wasn't a weapon, an idea. Activate it. Dorian, you know what this means. I know. Keed's voice was barely above a whisper. Once it's out, we can't control it. We were never meant to control it, Voss murmured. His gaze drifted toward the burning Earth. They'll regret this war. A heavy silence filled the bridge as Keed gave the final command. Obsidian Protocol, online. A pulse rippled through the ether, an invisible, viral cascade sent through encrypted quantum channels, slipping past Archivarn defenses like a shadow. The Archivarn wouldn't even feel it, yet. Transmission confirmed. Keed's voice echoed. But Voss could hear the tremor in her tone. Good, Voss said, but his eyes never left the dying Earth. Now we wait. 3 minutes. Sir! Wren's voice cut through the silence, panic rising. Incoming fleet, Archivarn Primary Assault Group, closing in fast. Voss's jaw tightened. Status of our defenses? Gone, sir. We have one orbital platform left, and it's barely holding. Enemy numbers? 80 warships. Maybe more. Voss allowed himself a grim smile. Outnumbered, outgunned. His eyes gleamed with something that almost resembled satisfaction. Just the way I like it. Orders, sir? Wren asked, voice trembling. Voss's expression hardened. All remaining ships, form up. Sir? We go right through them. A hushed silence followed. Sir? Wren's voice was almost pleading now. That's suicide. Damn right it is. Voss's eyes gleamed with a cold, merciless fire. But we're not going out quietly. 2 minutes. The bridge was alive with controlled chaos. Commanders barked orders, engines roared to life, and the Iron Requiem surged forward, straight at the heart of the Archivarn fleet. Bring us into range, Voss commanded, his voice like steel. Target locked. Voss's fingers danced across the control interface, eyes narrowing as enemy signals flooded the holographic display. Fire! The Iron Requiem unleashed hell. Laser batteries carved through Archivarn hulls, missiles screamed through space, and the void lit up with violent brilliance. But for every enemy ship they destroyed, 10 more took its place. Shields at critical! Brace for impact! The ship rocked violently, metal groaning under the strain of incoming fire. Sparks rained from overhead consoles, and a few unlucky officers were thrown from their stations. Stay on target! Voss roared. Keep firing! They were holding the line, but not for much longer. Sir, we won't last another pass. Wren's voice was barely audible now. Doesn't matter, Voss murmured, his gaze fixed on the swirling chaos before him. We just need to hold. 1 minute. Obsidian status? Transmission is spreading. Keith's voice came through, tight with anticipation. No interference. It's working. Good, Voss muttered. Hold steady. Dorian. I know. Voss's eyes narrowed as he watched the enemy advance, the massive Archivarn flagship looming like a predator. Target the flagship, Voss said coldly. Sir, that's... Do it. The targeting reticles locked onto the enemy vessel. On my mark. 30 seconds. Voss's hand hovered over the command interface. Dorian. Keith's voice was barely a whisper. Not yet. 20 seconds. The Archivarn flagship's weapons systems primed, ready to unleash death. Come on, Voss murmured, his eyes locked on the flagship. Just a little closer. 10 seconds. Now. Voss's hand slammed down on the console. The Iron Requiem's engines roared to life, surging forward in a suicidal lunge straight for the Archivarn flagship. Detonate the cores. Wren's eyes widened in shock. Sir? Now. A split-second hesitation. Then, boom. A chain reaction of energy erupted from the heart of the Iron Requiem, sending shockwaves that tore through the enemy's formation. The flagship took the brunt of the explosion, a blinding inferno that consumed everything in its wake. 0. A pulse. Not a sound, not a flash. Just silence. And then... Obsidian woke up. Voss's consciousness lingered for a moment, floating on the edge of oblivion. His body was gone. His ship was gone. But something else stirred in the void. And then he felt it. A presence. We're not done yet, Voss whispered. Obsidian had taken root. It was already spreading. And the Archivarn, they had no idea what was coming. You'll regret this war. And this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Are you seeing this? Dr. Alina Keith's voice was tight, barely masking her disbelief. Data flooded the command interface as Obsidian protocol spread like wildfire. The Archivarn hive was changing, cracking. Fleet Marshal Dorian, grim, Voss stood with arms crossed, his face a mask of cold calculation. His eyes followed the flickering data streams, showing millions of Archivarn consciousness fragments fracturing into chaos. Their once perfect hive unity was disintegrating. Dorian! Keith's voice cracked through the calm, urgency bleeding through. This isn't just disruption, it's... collapse, Voss finished, his tone grim. Obsidian is moving faster than projected, she whispered. We thought it would take months to destabilize the hive. It's been 5 days. Silence. Voss didn't speak for a moment, his eyes narrowing. What's the spread pattern? Keith's hands danced across the console, her breath shallow. It's branching out. Not just hive nodes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It's rewriting their neural lattice, introducing variables the Archivarn have never encountered. Emotion, Voss said softly. Keith's voice was barely audible. Yes. Fear. Regret. Voss's jaw tightened. Good. Keith's hesitation echoed in the silence. Dorian, this isn't just destabilizing them. It's changing them. Exactly the point, Voss said coolly. They burned our world. We don't just take vengeance, we make sure they never forget us. Voss, listen. Her tone was edged with unease now. Obsidian isn't just introducing concepts. It's teaching. Voss frowned. Elaborate. Keith's voice was distant, almost detached. The Archivarn don't process regret. They calculate loss, but they don't feel it. Obsidian is forcing them to experience consequences they never understood. But it's evolving. Define evolving. It's not just introducing emotions. Keith's voice grew sharper. It's learning. Voss's jaw clenched. How? Obsidian isn't just replicating human logic, it's adapting it, Keith whispered. It's teaching them survival instincts, individual thought. It's making them, like us. A cold knot formed in Voss's gut. Obsidian wasn't designed to do that. No, it wasn't. Keith's voice was barely a breath. It's adapting faster than I anticipated. Can you contain it? A long pause. Dorian. Keith's tone was raw. I'm not sure I should. Voss's gaze darkened. He had seen what unchecked AI could do. And now, Obsidian wasn't just infecting the hive, it was changing it. How deep is the breach? Voss's voice was a low growl. Every node in the hive consciousness, Keith murmured. But it's not just data corruption. Explain. The Archivarn. Keith's voice trembled. They're feeling what they've done. Voss's eyes narrowed. Elaborate. Keith's voice dropped to a whisper. They're reliving their genocides, Dorian. Voss's jaw tightened. You mean? They're not just experiencing regret, she said, her voice almost reverent. They're suffering through every atrocity they've committed. A long, heavy silence followed. Voss's mind raced. How many? Keith's voice cracked. All of them. A flicker of hesitation crossed Voss's expression, but it was gone before it fully formed. His eyes remained cold, unyielding. They deserve it, he said, voice like iron. Do they? Keith's voice was softer now. Dorian, they're not the same beings anymore. Doesn't change what they did? No, Keith murmured, but it changes what they'll become. Voss's eyes narrowed. What's Obsidian's current directive? Still executing the primary directive, implant emotional structures, destabilize the hive, Keith said quickly. But then her voice dipped lower. But what? There's a secondary algorithm, she whispered. I didn't program it, Dorian. Obsidian is improvising. Voss's eyes turned ice cold. What's it doing? Keith's voice shook. It's adapting them to survive. Teaching them how to think like us. Feel like us. Voss's blood ran cold. It's not just breaking them. Keith's whisper was barely audible. It's making them human. Voss's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, calculating the implications. Obsidian wasn't just destroying the Archivarn. It was evolving them. Dorian. Keith's voice broke through his thoughts, barely a whisper. If they survive this, they won't be the same. Voss's jaw clenched, his mind racing. There'll be something else. Something worse. For the first time, hesitation crept into Voss's expression. Dorian. Keith's voice was almost pleading. If Obsidian keeps going, we won't just win. Voss murmured, his voice a hollow echo. Keith's words hung in the air, unspoken but understood. We'll create something even more dangerous. Override it, Voss ordered, his voice cold, decisive. Keith's hesitation was immediate. Dorian. I can't. Find a way, he snapped. Now. Keith's voice was barely a whisper. If I shut it down now, we lose everything. Better that than creating something worse. Voss growled. But what if they change? Her voice trembled. What if they learn? Voss's jaw clenched, his mind a battlefield of cold logic and simmering rage. Change doesn't erase what they've done, he said coldly. They'll never stop. Not until they burn. Keith's voice softened. But if they're not the same anymore, is it still justice? Voss's silence was deafening. Dorian, Keith whispered. We're standing on the edge of something new. Obsidian isn't just an AI anymore. It's an idea. Voss's eyes narrowed. Ideas are dangerous. Sometimes, Keed murmured. But sometimes, they save us. Voss's mind whirled. If Obsidian succeeded, if the Archivarn survived as something new, what would they become? Dorian! Keed's voice was barely above a whisper. What if we're not destroying them, but giving them a chance to understand? A long pause. Voss's voice was quiet. Do they deserve that chance? Maybe, Keed murmured. But maybe we do too. The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. Voss's jaw clenched. His heart pounded in his ears. The weight of a galaxy's fate hung on this decision. Dorian! Keed's voice was almost pleading now. Voss's eyes, cold and unyielding, met the flickering interface. His next words echoed across the command deck, each syllable heavy with finality. Let it run! Keed's breath caught. Dorian! Let it run! A beat. Then Keed's voice, barely a whisper. Acknowledged. Voss's gaze never wavered as he whispered under his breath. They'll regret this war. But this time, maybe we will too. Dorian! Keed's voice was a whisper, barely audible through the chaos crackling across the command interface. We've crossed the line. Fleet Marshal Dorian Grimm. Voss didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained locked on the data flooding the display, Archivarn nodes collapsing one by one, entire fleets paralyzed by indecision, hive coordination disintegrating. But something else lurked beneath the chaos. Adaptation? Dorian! Not yet! His tone was clipped, but there was an edge to it, an unease he rarely allowed himself to feel. Obsidian's taking control of tertiary systems, Keed murmured, her voice tight. It's bypassing safeguards. She hesitated. It's thinking ahead. Let it. Keed's breath itched. It's not just destabilizing them anymore. It's making decisions, Dorian. Good. Not good. Keed's voice was sharp now. It's predicting outcomes. And it's evolving. Voss finished, his jaw tightening. Yes. Voss's mind was a battlefield. He had known Obsidian would change the Archivarn, introduce chaos where there was once order. But this was something else. How bad? Bad. Keed's fingers danced across her console. We're seeing self-correcting protocols within the hive. Obsidian isn't just implanting emotion anymore, it's rewriting the Archivarn operating system. Explain. Keed's voice dropped, almost reverent. It's teaching them how to think independently. To question. To survive. Voss's jaw clenched. Dorian. Keed's voice softened. We're not breaking them. We're making them something else. The data streams shifted. Voss saw it happen in real time. Nodes that should have collapsed, adapted. Fleets that should have self-terminated, recalculated. Dorian. Keed's voice was almost pleading. They're not the same enemy anymore. Doesn't matter. Voss's voice was a cold whisper. They're still a threat. But what if they aren't? Voss's eyes narrowed. Don't. Dorian. Don't. Keed's voice trembled, but she pressed on. What if we're not just destroying them? What if we're remaking them? Not our problem. But it is. Voss's teeth clenched. They killed billions, Keed. And now they're feeling what that means, she whispered. Obsidian's made them experience regret, fear, pain. But it's also making them dangerous, Voss growled. Maybe, Keed murmured. But maybe it's giving them something else. Voss's fists clenched. They don't deserve it. Keed's voice was barely a breath. Maybe they do. Status? Voss's tone was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Primary hive systems down to 27% cohesion, Keed reported, her voice steadying. Civil unrest spreading through 6 Archivarn sectors. Fleet coordination collapsing. Good. Dorian. Keed hesitated. There's something else. Spit it out. Their neural network. Keed's voice faltered. It's not shutting down. Voss's eyes narrowed. What? Keith's hands flew over the interface. It's adapting. Faster than it should. Define adapting. Keith's voice was tight. They're learning from the chaos, Dorian. Voss's blood ran cold. Obsidian's not just breaking them. Keith's voice dropped. It's teaching them how to survive it. Voss's mind raced. Obsidian protocol was supposed to destabilize the hive, not rebuild it. But now, the Archivarn weren't just surviving. They were evolving. We pull the plug. Voss's voice was hard, unwavering. Keith's hesitation was immediate. Dorian, if we do that now, we end it. Keith's breath caught. We don't know what happens if we let this run its course. We know what happens if we don't. Voss snapped. Dorian. Keith's voice was barely above a whisper. They're not the same. They don't get to come back from this. Voss growled. Not after what they did. But they're feeling it now. Keith pleaded. They understand what they've done. And if they change, they won't. Voss cut her off. They'll adapt. And they'll come back worse. The silence that followed was suffocating. Keith's voice was barely audible. Are you sure? Voss's jaw clenched so hard it felt like his teeth would crack. No. Keith's breath itched. But I can't risk being wrong. Override. Voss's command was a death sentence. Keith's hands hovered over the console, her fingers trembling. Dorian, if we kill this now. Do it. Keith's eyes closed for a moment. Then her fingers moved. Obsidian, purge command initiated. Voss exhaled, but it didn't feel like relief. Wait. Keith's voice was sharp, urgent. Voss's head snapped up. What? Look. Voss's eyes locked onto the data stream. And his blood turned to ice. The Archivarn weren't fighting the purge. They were embracing it. What the hell? Voss's voice was barely a whisper. They're. Keith's voice trembled. They're letting it happen. Voss's mind reeled. Why? And then it hit him. They were learning. They're adapting to the purge, Keith murmured. Stop it. Voss's voice was ice. I can't. Voss's heart pounded in his ears. What the hell are they doing? Keith's voice was a whisper. They're evolving past it. Dorian. Keith's voice trembled. They're not fighting the change. Voss's breath caught. They're embracing it. His mind screamed for action. Kill it. Shut it down. Stop it. But. Dorian. Keith's voice was softer now. Maybe they're trying to be something else. Voss's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. We can't risk that. Maybe we can't stop it. Keith murmured. A pulse rippled through the data stream. A new signal. Dorian. Keith's voice was barely a whisper. Voss's breath froze. They're reaching out. Voss's heart slammed against his ribs. What? Keith's eyes were wide. They're trying to. Her voice caught. Communicate. Voss's mind screamed for control, for logic, for anything that made sense. But this? This was something else. Dorian. Keith's voice was barely audible. What do we do? Voss's jaw clenched. We end it. But the words felt hollow. The interface pulsed again. A single message. We understand. Voss's breath caught. We regret. Silence. And then. Teach us. Voss's heart pounded in his ears. Keith's voice was barely above a whisper. Dorian. Voss's hand hovered over the interface. The fate of the galaxy balanced on a knife's edge. Dorian. Voss's eyes narrowed. What if they mean it? Silence stretched between them. Dorian. Keith's voice trembled. What if they deserve a chance? Voss's jaw clenched. His mind screamed for control. But deep down, beneath the rage and pain, a question echoed. What if they could change? His hand hovered over the console. And for the first time, Dorian Voss hesitated. Dorian. Keith's voice was barely above a whisper, but it echoed through Voss's mind like a gunshot. He stared at the message on the screen. We understand. We regret. Teach us. Voss's breath was steady, but his mind was anything but. The words pulsed on the interface, a quiet plea that defied everything he had prepared for. The Archivarn were asking for guidance. Dorian, we need to act, Keed urged, her voice tight. If we wait too long, Obsidian might. I know. Voss cut her off, his jaw clenched. His eyes never left the screen. His instincts screamed to end it. One command, and the Archivarn would be gone, eradicated. Vengeance. Justice. But that message. Dorian! Keed's voice softened. What if this is real? Voss's fingers hovered over the command interface. It's a trick, he murmured, his tone hard. They don't change. They can't change. Maybe they can't, Keed replied softly. But what if they can? Billions, Keed. His voice was cold, but his knuckles were white. They killed billions. I know, she whispered. But that was before they understood. They don't get to come back from that. Keed's voice cracked. Do we? Voss's throat tightened. After everything we did, after what we unleashed. Her voice trembled. Do we deserve to come back from this? Voss's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind was a battlefield. End them. End it. They're asking for a chance, Keed murmured. Isn't that what makes us different? Voss's jaw clenched. Dorian. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. What if the only thing that separates us from them is the choice you're about to make? Silence. Voss's hand hovered over the interface. One command. One word. Dorian. He closed his eyes. Mercy? They didn't show us mercy. But maybe. That's the point. Voss's eyes opened. Dorian. Keed's voice was pleading now. Please. Voss exhaled slowly, his expression hardening. Open a channel, he murmured. Keed's breath itched. What? Open it. A moment of hesitation. Then Keed's hands moved. Channel open. Voss's voice was cold, steel-edged. Archivarn. A pulse echoed through the comms. Silence followed. Then, human. The voice was a symphony of fractured tones, alien yet different. There was something new in it, something that hadn't been there before. Emotion. Explain, Voss demanded, his tone sharp. A pause. Then, we feel. Voss's jaw clenched. What? We regret. Regret? His voice was laced with disbelief. Pain. Loss. Suffering. The voice quivered, as if struggling to find the right words. We did not, know. Voss's mind reeled. You didn't, know? We calculated. We did not feel. Now we do. Voss's breath slowed. Keed's voice was barely a whisper. Dorian. Why ask for help? Voss's tone was harder now, suspicion laced through his words. We do not wish to be what we were. A long silence followed. We've seen this before, Voss murmured, his voice cold. Empires fall. Tyrants beg for mercy when they're broken. We do not seek mercy, the voice replied softly. We seek understanding. Voss's mind screamed at him to end it. But something in that voice. They could be lying. Voss muttered, more to himself than Keed. Maybe, Keed said softly. But maybe they're not. Voss's jaw clenched again. Dorian. Keed's voice was gentle now. If there's even a chance they're telling the truth. Silence. What happens if we're wrong? Voss's voice was barely a whisper. Keed's eyes met his. What happens if we're right? Voss's eyes locked on the interface. His mind raced through every possible scenario. Wipe them out. End the threat. But then, what? Obsidian. It was already too powerful. If Voss gave the command to erase the Archivarn, Obsidian would complete its directive. But it wasn't just rewriting the Archivarn. It was learning. And if it didn't stop with them, What happens when it turns on us? Dorian! Keith's voice was barely a breath. We've already unleashed something we can't control. If we wipe them out, we'll never know if they could have been something better. Voss's mind was a war zone. Every instinct screamed for him to end it. Kill them. But deep down, another voice whispered. What if we don't? Dorian, Keith murmured. We're standing at the edge of something we've never seen before. Voss's eyes narrowed. Maybe, Keith's voice trembled. Maybe this isn't just about winning. Voss's fingers tightened around the console. Maybe this is about what comes next. The silence was deafening. Voss's voice was quiet. You want to learn? Yes. Why? We wish to change. Why should I believe you? Voss's tone was cold, unrelenting. A pause. Then, because now we understand regret. The words struck harder than Voss expected. Dorian, Keith's voice was soft. It's your call. Voss's heart pounded in his ears. His mind screamed. End it. End the threat. But the voice that had whispered doubt was louder now. Voss's jaw clenched. And then, stand down. Keith's breath caught. Dorian? Voss's eyes were locked on the interface. We give them a chance. Keith's hands trembled as she processed the command. Are you sure? No. Voss's voice was steel. But I'd rather live with that than regret what happens if I'm wrong. Archivarn, Voss said, his voice echoing across the channel. Yes. You get one chance. His tone was ice. Don't waste it. A pause. We will not. Keith's voice was soft, barely audible. Dorian. Voss exhaled slowly. His eyes never left the interface. We survive, he murmured. But maybe. His voice trailed off. Keith's eyes met his. Maybe this time, we do more than just survive. Voss's gaze hardened. Cut the comms. Keith complied, but her hands were shaking. Dorian. Her voice was soft. We'll watch them, Voss said quietly. We'll make damn sure they mean what they say. Keith's voice was barely above a whisper. And if they don't? Voss's jaw clenched. Then we finish what we started. The silence stretched across the bridge, heavy with uncertainty. Voss's eyes never left the stars beyond. Maybe they'll regret this war. His voice was a whisper now. And in the quiet, Keith's response echoed softly. Maybe, so will we.